Hello, nice to meet you, everyone. So good to see you again about TH490 Leadership in Ministry. So today, I'm gonna start for the pray about our situation because so very complicated in the international politic problem. So United States attack in Iran with the Israel, and so the economic is a very crisis because yesterday I had to fill up my gas into my car. The price is how much is 20%, 30% is expensive than before. I guess this war between United States and Iran is maybe couple months, I can guess. But anyway, so before start the class, I want to pray. Heavenly Father, no matter what our situation is, thank you for the grace that has kept us so far. Thank you for your grace again. However, here are students who are sick and have a hard time. Here are also students who are struggling financially. Some students have a hard time with their relationship with friends and neighbors or family. May the wisdom of Him who can overcome all of them or be able to overcome the difficult process. Therefore, let's live our lives tomorrow with new strength from Jesus Christ. Now, the beginning of the class, grant us wisdom until the end of class. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. How are you, everybody? So today, we're going to change the time and we lose the 1 hour. But Monday, so we're gonna start again. Okay, today so we are starting lecture 6, almost middle of this semester, and usually we had a review the before last class, and today is a new category about the leadership in servant leadership. Okay, so I want to review about the concept of biblical leadership. It's a 2 words. First one is fear God and obey God. The first condition for a leader to fear God was to obey God. And then so you should remember that the 2 words is fear God, obey God. Fear and obey. This is a key word for biblical leadership. Another one is the fear God and obey God is theory, and then next one is a practicum. This point emphasizes that in obeying God's guidance and not human. There is God's guidance. You should be follow, and biblical leadership should be follow God's guidance, not humans' guidance. I'm sorry. And classification of leaders' ability. So 3 words. It's the first one, technical. Second, human. And totally conceptual skill. So must be professionalism and personality. 2 kinds. When you study the university, and then you should get the degree about the bachelor degree, but you must be follow together your personality. This is a technical skill and human skill. And then combine is conceptual skill. Who said? Robert Koch, the professor of Harvard in United States. And what is a traditional leadership? We can say is 3 kinds. One is a charismatic leadership. Charismatic leadership is a purpose-oriented. There is a production-oriented. There is a not human, not people concerned about that. That is work oriented. The charismatic leadership is still we can met the every in business field. Some boss, some owners, they had the charismatic leadership because they are concerned only profit and work oriented. But today we're gonna start and we're gonna review about the servant leadership. Servant leadership is a tradition concern about the biblical leadership. And maybe after midterm, we're gonna study transformational leadership. Anyway, so traditional leadership theory is a three category. First one is charismatic leadership, and second, servant leadership, and third one is a transformational leadership. What is Jesus leadership? Jesus leadership we can define about the three category. First one is sacrifice. So when Jesus Christ came from heaven to earth, that we call it the theological theory is incarnation. And Jesus Christ has an incarnation because he want to die due to our sin, human sin. And then so Jesus Christ going to the cross for the crucified, that is a sacrifice. And 3 years Jesus Christ gathered all together with the 12 disciples, and also he said and he get the relation with the Pharisees or the ordinary people. That is communication. That communication is not only one-way communication. That is a multiple communication. And third one is accountability. Accountability is a little bit different. Is responsibility. Accountability is intentionally vulnerable perspective. So not blame to shifting. So anyway, it's a three category of Jesus leadership. First one, sacrifice, communication, and accountability. And you should remember the four keyword. What is the concept of leadership? Leadership will take place in any kind of situation. And why we need this leadership? Because we should be achieve the goal, our goal or organizational goal. And how we get the relation with the leadership and followership is this empowerment. So leader bring to the empower to their members, and all situation, all process is a processing. So situation, what kind of a situation, and what is your goal, and how you empowerment, and everything is a process. This is the concept of leadership. There's a process is a conclusion word, and you should imagine about the situation and what is goal and how empowerment, and that is a circulation of the process. That's why it's Otto Schumann, who has the make a theory of U theory. There's a 7-stage principle of U theory. First one is holding the space. Holding the space, a starting line. That's why it's where I am, where we were. We should define that. And second is observation. What kind of the situation, what we have the resource, how many we get the financial backup, or how many people gathering our organization. That's why the second stage is observation. And third one is sensing, is a recognition. So we should be everything analysis. And fourth one is And then where is the difference of the from the starting line, starting point, and now? So we check up the in the middle of the process. And fifth one is motivation. Whenever you check up the middle position and then you make another motivation as like a same starting line holding the space. And sixth step is strategy. Strategy is of course is when you start in the line where I am, and then you should get the must be strategy. But after presenting and you check up the remodify your strategy, and last one execution. This is a final decision. And third one is according to the type of behavior of the leadership. So we can define over the behavior of the leadership. We say authoritarian. Authoritarian is a little bit similar, is a charismatic leadership. Authoritarian is a very hierarchy structure in the organization, and also authoritarian leadership has the task and oriented, just work oriented and production oriented. Authoritarian. They are not concerned about human life or human situation or welfare of the employee. Not too much. And second behavior of leadership, we say the democratic leadership. The democratic leadership is oriented by the relationship. That is a normal and popular leadership in this world. And third one is abandoning leadership. Abandoning leadership is not unrespectable leaders. They don't have the leader who doesn't have the responsibility about the organization and members, and also by himself or herself. And fourth one is a consultative leadership. Consultative leadership is the similar about the abandoning leadership and mix up the authoritarian and democratic leadership. And last one is a participatory group leadership, is the very ideal leadership, because the leader has a little bit authoritarian or charismatic leadership by nature, personality, but he concerned about the human, also in organization members. He hear about, listen to from their members and make opinions, make every opinions, and before he make a decision. That is a very similar in democratic leadership, but also they had the authoritarian and charismatic leadership also together. That's why it's a participatory group leadership. Okay, how about the leadership in ministry? The spiritual leader is first one is personality. There's integrity and obedience. Because in first time, leadership in fear God and obey God. Fear God and obey God. For God's guidance, not human guidance. That's why it's a personality is a little bit disposition given by God. So they don't claim about their own ownership. Ownership given to the God, and they accept of the ownership from the God. There is a personality, and integrity is a sincerity of believing that God. That's why people cannot lie, cannot cheating, cannot manipulate to somebody. And third one is obedience, the word of God, the Creator, because we was created by the God, and then the creator should be control and lead to us. That's why so we should be faith. And also in compare about the U theory and spiritual leadership. By U theory, first one is open mind. First the stage where you need to open your thinking without being bound by your own experience or pre-knowledge. So don't concerning about your pre-knowledge. The first stage, you should be open mind as like a child, as like a children. So that is the same as like teachable mind as a student. I think you know the very well in leadership or another theory or another class, not only my class, but you must be open mind. And then concentrate about the class. Just as you should try other style, not only your pre-knowledge or your pre-experience style, not strong bound. So you try new style or new method or new way through the class or your job field or your relation with your friend or your neighbors. Then you must be, your mind is opened. That is, first of all, spiritual leadership by your theory is an open mind. And second is open heart. So your mind is like controlled by your knowledge, but your heart controlled by your feeling. The second, eat with your heart rather than your head. In other words, you need to find motivation to put it into practice rather than just theory. That's why the second open heart is very similar, very concerned about the practicum, not only theory. And last one is the open will. So you have the open mind and you get the open heart, and then finally you should be doing, you should be act. Third is execution about fear of failure. Don't be fear of failure. So every time you had a mistake, don't worry about that, because as soon as much mistake, and then you can get the more experience and you're more knowledgeable experience and wisdom. The failure of a spiritual leader is the failure of the process, not the result. Don't be concerned about the result. Only concerned about process. And then you should be observation about your own process, what's problem, and how your condition or external condition. You check up that and observation. However, spiritual success can also be achieved through the failure. This is a very good thing. How can you get the success? Because success can also be achieved through failure. That's why so last week I had an assignment about a speech of Denzel Washington in University of Pennsylvania. The title is what's that? Fall forward. Don't worry about that failure. Just only fall forward, because you can, when you fall down through the forward, and then you can see what's the problem and what is the weak point and what is your own repeated mistake, and then you can find out, and then more and more you are very developed at. Okay, today is lecture 6, servant leadership. Is the concept of servant leadership. So first, the scholar of Greenleaf, the Robert K. Greenleaf, he mentioned about the servant leadership at the first. How about biblical leader is a person who has the identity of a steward who follows God's will and takes on the role of serving the community with love and sacrifice. That is the I taught a second class in this class, TH490. So Greenleaf is a mention about first time mention in servant leadership as like a same spiritual leader. The Robert K. Greenleaf, he said also, servant leadership is a technique that focus on serving others rather than managing for result to create an environment where team members can thrive. That is a not result concern. More concern about the serving the people, serving others. The servant leadership is a focus on serving others rather than for result. That means that in charismatic leadership, traditional leadership as like a charismatic leadership focus on result, the work oriented. But servant leadership is opposite. They are focused on serving others, the people, human right, rather than for production result. So what is the difference of traditional leadership and servant leadership? As you see that the diagram, so what's the purpose? Purpose of traditional leadership is interested in growth of organizations and organization. So traditional leadership is the interest of growth, that is a volume and size. But servant leadership, the leader himself care about the purpose. Why? The leadership asks by himself or herself every time. Why? Why we should get the more production? Why we should get the more size, more volume, more profit? Why? What for? That is a servant leadership. What is priority? What is priority? For the traditional leadership, it priority the result of the organization and the interest of shareholders or people with interest. That is the not members of organization. They are don't concern not too much for the members. Only leader by himself or herself or a shareholder, just like a stockholder or interest of a shareholder or people with interest as customers. But servant leadership has the priority. Think of members first. Our members, our people, our employee. The servant leadership think of the members first, and second, interest of those who belongs to interest as interest of shareholder or board members or people with interest as customer. That is a priority. First priority of a servant leadership is think of the member first, the followers. That is a big difference. And how to care about traditional leadership is authoritarian rule over members. There's a very hierarchy structure in traditional leadership. But servant leadership is serving the opinions of the member. There is a vertical leadership, not to hierarchy. So my position and your position is legally different, but our function is the same as achieve our goal. And we discuss about what is our goal and how can we get our same goals. That is serving the opinion of the members. And what is the difference of instruction type? Instruction type is in traditional leadership, imperative type, that means the order. You should do. You don't have to that. That is an order, just like soldiers. Servant leadership is an instruction type, is a hearing type. What do you think about that? Why you should do that? What is your condition? The leader, servant leader, should open their heart, mind, and will. It's just like your theory. And last one is a compensation of a system. And traditional leadership is a reward or punishment. When you get the latter result about the production, and then give to reward. But if you don't achieve the goal, and then must be punishment. But servant leadership is their concern about the welfare, about the members, and incentive system. That is concern about the members. Another Greenleaf said, a leader for servant leadership must use leadership according to strictly biblical principle. So Greenleaf said, as a servant leadership according to strictly biblical principles, and servant leadership must have a sacrificial attitude to putting the organization. There is a biblical principle, is a sacrificial attitude, as like Jesus Christ. It members, and furthermore, the customer first, not the leader himself. That means the members first, and second, customer, and last one is a leader. But you know that in the secular organization, just like a company where they set up the profit goal, and then they concern about first one is interest people, the customer first, and leader second, and then last one is members. That is a secular leaders system, but spiritual leader, as like a servant leader, is a biblical principle and sacrificial attitude. Therefore, Greenleaf, he said the servant leadership is the becoming a servant leader begins with the natural feeling. That is a mistype. Feeling that one want to serve first. That's why servant leadership must be naturally feeling that one want to serve. The serving mind first. Then conscious choice bring one to aspire to lead. When you have the serving to others people, and then the members or the other people respect to the leadership, in servant leadership, and they like to empower to the leaders. There is a vulnerable. So in secular system, the leader must be strong power, because the leader must be control the other people. But in biblical and spiritual leader, as like a servant leadership, as like a humble and vulnerable people, and then all members getting make their own power going to empower to the leader, servant leader. That's why the organization has the one unit as like a family, or as like a same purpose group. Okay, second, servant leader characteristic. Servant leadership prioritize the desire to serve other first. Every time, so servant leader serve other people. However, no matter how pure and altruistic your heart is, it is necessary to learn. If you are naturally feeling is not serve the other first, but don't worry about it because you must be trained how to maintain, supplement, or be misunderstood. So you trained and educate going as the servant leadership. And first one, servant leader characteristic. First one, hearing. Hearing is not same as like listening. So when I stand in front of you as the class, and then some student talking by each other, and then I said, listen to me, listen to my word. That is the one-way dialogue. I say and you should be listen. But hearing is something different. Hearing is you say or I say, no matter what. We talking and listen together, each other. But listening is listening people and talking people is separate. But hearing is a listen and talking together. That is one community. We can make the one community. And the servant leader must be hearing skills. You must be hearing and open your ear and some opinion about from the organization members. They say, and then you should be hearing, not listening. And second is very important about the compensation. Compassion, not compensation. Compensation is a reward and salary and money. But compassion is we can say to get divide about sympathy and empathy. What is the sympathy and empathy? The sympathy is the how can I say? Sympathy is empowering and encouraging to people. The sympathy, so whenever, for example, so whenever you friend or neighbors said, so my father or mother passed away, or I have a big car accident, and then we say, oh, I'm sorry. And then when I was in the United States, and then the United States people say, oh, I'm sorry, and then I think, why? Why they say I'm sorry? Because they don't have the mistake about me. But that is a sympathy. My sorrow, my hard time, is like same feeling about the other people. That's a sympathy. But empathy is a little bit same experience or fully understand about the other's experience. When I drop my class or I lose then my grade, and then, right, I had the same experience last semester, and so very, very hard time. I cannot sleep couple days. And then I know, I fully understand what your situation and what you had a hard time you are feeling. That is empathy. And for another example is your boss or your employer, some treat about the very unfair treat or unfair or some mistake to you. And then you are very upset to your leaders. And then when I heard your situation, and then I say, same as like your upset feeling. right, you are very, very unfair situation. Why don't you claim to your boss or your organization? I can help you. You say to the people. That's like empathy. That is, empathy is internally relation with the other people. But sympathy is the not internal relation or a little bit external relation. But servant leader must be had the character of compassion, empathy and sympathy together. And then your members is respect to you, or they follow to you as like leaders. And third one is healing. So counseling and mentoring, I think you know as well. So in servant leadership must be power of healing or technically healing method as like counseling and mentoring. And fourth one is cognition. Cognition is self-knowledge and self-decision. Whenever you get so many information from your members, and first of all, you must cognition. You must self-knowledge by in your mind, in your knowledge, and your system. And then you can make a self-decision for priority to your members. That is a servant leader's characteristic, cognition. And fifth one is persuasion. Persuasion is not say I say, you should do that. I say, you don't have to do that. You don't be late. I say. But we can say we. How can we not too late in my class? We talking about together. That is a persuasion. We say our community, our organization, and our profit, our goals. So not to say I. Okay, and then six, conceptualization. Conceptualization is you know that all A grade, every class, but you cannot do that as like same A grade. Why? You know only in your head, only your knowledge, but practicum isn't separate. Why? You don't have a training and repeated practice. Only you know. That is, for example, somebody say you should know that is a good following direction. That's like blah blah blah, and then you say I know very well, and then why? The other people say as like same. Repeat that because you know, but you didn't do that. Why? You didn't have a training or you didn't have a repeated practice. But servant leader characteristic must be same as like a leader say and leader's practicum as like a same. And speaking and doing is as like one unit. That is a conceptualization by servant leadership. And second is foresight. Foresight is the predict about in the future. There is we can say is a vision. So we present about our organization vision. There is a big picture, and then a lot of members, so that our organization goal, what we like to that. And then the recommend about the SWOT. SWOT is the survey, as like a survey. The S means the strength, and W means the weakness, and O means opportunity, and T is strength. What is strengths our organization? What do you think about? Ask to your members. And what is our weakness of the organization? For example, our strength is for example, is IUTS. What is the strength of the IUTS? For example, not truly, but for example, it doesn't matter. So our tuition is cheap. That is our strength. And our facility is a very good location. Our strength. And our curriculum, it can be the flexibility. Depends on the student. That is a strength. And what is a weak? What is a weakness? The parking space or parking method is a weakness. And after 6 p.m., the air conditioning is shut off. That's why especially in summertime, the classroom is not good, not so good air conditioning and too hot. That is a weakness. And 7 p.m., the student who has the late in the class, they can come in the building. It's very hard. That is a weakness. What is strength and what is a weakness? And what is opportunity? So when we buy ourselves for the air conditioner, and then not to winter time, only summer time, we can use that. That is our opportunity. Or we can expand, or we can move another place. That is opportunity. What is strength? Strength is what is fear from the other side. For example, how about that? Our location is Koreatown. Sometimes at the night time especially is a very dangerous something, and then so homeless people nearby the school institution, that is addressed. That's like that is SWOT, for example, and then so we can get some information by the survey, and then the leader, servant leader, can have the foresight, make a big picture or just of the big picture. Our mission statement. 8 is a stewardship. Stewardship is the accountability. Stewardship must be responsibility to the organization or organization's members, not to blame to the members. Some leader should be blamed to their own employees or members, but servant leader characteristic is not to blame to members, only stewardship. And fear God and obey God, not guidance, human. Guidance, God's guidance. Follow that, and then the servant leader characteristic is stewardship. And commitment. Don't confuse about the participate, involvement, engaging. Participating and involvement and engaging is bound to be sacrificial of the organization or its member through dedication. So participating and involvement and engaging must be relation with the reward, their profit, their own goal. But commitment is bound to be sacrificial to the organization or its member through dedication. That is sacrifice. Commitment and totally different in participating. So when you participate this class, why? You must get the degree, or you must get the A grade. Why you involve this internship? because you need more extra credit. That everything is you or the members want to the reward. But commitment is not concerned about the reward. Bound, so strongly bound to be sacrificial attitude to the organization or other members through my dedication, commitment. This is a commitment. There is a servant leadership, that's why it's a similar biblical leadership. And last one is a systemization. Systemization is a repeat and training system, like from theory to the practical. Then servant leadership must establish the system and patterns, the regularly same function as like patterns. And then members of the organization should be trained. Okay, so third one is a stage of servant leader. So we study about the 10th category about the servant leadership characteristic. And now is a 6th stage of a servant leader. First one, what is stage of leader in model? The frontier, lead by example. At the forefront of the organization. Last time I taught you what is the difference in boss and leader. Leader at the forefront. And just like a mother, to follow your members, watch your footstep. But boss has the back position and then push it to your members in front. That is the boss. That's a stage of servant leader, especially as like a model, lead by example. That is at the forefront of the organization. And second is motivation. Motivation means that the leader, model leader, as like a forefront, and then give to the sacrificial aspect to the members, and then all members has the motivated and encouraging. Even the leader concerned about their members. So when you find that some are weak or sick members, and then you give to the healings and sympathy and empathy. That is encouraging. And fourth one, empowering. If you achieve this goal, and then you are one more step develop that, and one more possibility about your financially or your position stage. That is empowering. And intimacy. Intimacy is the personal intimacy. So leader concern about your family problem or your condition as like sick, or your relation with your family, your father, mother, or your children. That is intimacy for personal intimacy. That is a servant leadership. And last one is feedback by the multi-communications. Not only narrow communication. So much diversity should be get a lot of different kind of the opinion to the servant leadership. That is the sixth kind of stage of servant leadership: model, motivation, encouraging, empowerment, and intimacy and multi-communication. And last one is you should compare about the what is the advantage of servant leadership and what is the disadvantage of servant leadership. Of course, it's a leadership. So many kind, so many diversity situation. That's why it's a lot of different theory about the leadership. Servant leadership is not 100% perfect leadership. There also has the disadvantage. That's why, so what kind of leadership is like very efficient in our organization, and then you can choose that. Anyways, what is the advantage of the servant leadership? First one, the servant leadership can make unit one. Very strength organizational coherence. Cohesion is the very tight relation, just like a family or peoples, same people, that is unit one. Because very closely personal relation and intimacy and empowering, encouraging, healing, hearing. That's why it's servant leadership has a very good advantage, make unit one. And second advantage is a creative and unique culture with the personal relationship. So very strong servant leadership who work in the organization. It's a very unique culture and unique culture in the school or family or no matter what. Very unique one. That's why it's creative thinking. Not only creative thinking, but also creative method and creative result. This is a very unique one. This is the advantage of servant leadership, but the other one, opposite in disadvantage. What is the disadvantage of servant leadership? First one, leadership is very weak, especially in crisis situation. Because too many opinion and too much creative thinking, no matter what kind of crisis situation. That is a unique culture. But ironically, we can say, so advantage of servant leadership is also same disadvantage leadership. That's why it's a diversity opinion. That's very democratic leadership, but that is a weak leadership in especially crisis situation. Second, disadvantage of servant leadership is a waste of resource as time, as manpower. Because that's due to the weak leadership, and then they cannot control it very strictly, and then the time is going, and they lose the resource. As time lose and manpower lose. And last disadvantage of servant leadership is difficult to gather information due to diversity. So many kind people, and we concern about the totally, and then automatic we lose time and lose the manpower, and make one direction is very difficult in servant leadership. But servant leadership is not concerned about the result, not oriented work. Servant leadership is concerned about the human. That's why so in the Bible said, that Jesus Christ said, so the Father in heaven concerned about only one sheep, not 99 sheep. Only one sheep concerned about that. That is a secular say. That is a very inefficient rule. Very rude one. But that is character of the servant leadership. Okay, I want to give the assignment as like last week. Watch the video below and write down your own simple impressions in 1 or 2 sentences. Last, you mention and you impression about the watch the video, especially Denzel Washington, very insight, and I had a thank you for your opinion and your effort and your commitment in my class. This video, her name is Liz Delphine. She is concerned about the servant leadership, for especially in the squeeze of the company, and then the people kick it out from the company. They lose, they lay off, and then how servant leadership can use that. The Liz say in the how many minutes, about 10 to 15 minutes, not too long, and I wanna ask you 1 or 2 sentences what you feeling watch the video. It's like that. Okay, thank you. And another one is I want to announcement for next week. Next week is the 7th week, the before mid-term, and then I want to lecture about the servant leadership a little bit, make a quiz, and I want to review about the quiz from the second lecture from until 6th lecture. Okay, so you want to make a good grade in my class, and then very concerned and concentrate about the next week lectures. Okay, thank you, and see you next week.